So, welcome on in, everybody. It is July, and that means it's the first Wednesday of the month, and it's HR Lunch Bunch. My name is Deborah Jeffries, and if we've not met before, I serve as the Vice President of the company of HR Answers, where I've worked here for a number of years. Today, we're going to have a topic around gender bias in the workplace. And again, if you have questions or follow ups after our program, you have my contact information there. But please know, I always create a little PowerPoint. I will always send it out to those people who attended today. We will send out a link for the recording. Yes, we do record the program. And this really is an opportunity for us to network. Oftentimes, many of us go to other meetings, there's a speaker. Great, love it. I'm all about education. If you know me, you know I'm about education. I also want us to be able to talk and learn from each other. What's working for you? What experiences have you had? What hasn't worked? What have been your bumps? What can you share? How can you mentor? Let's participate with each other. So I have the chat box open. If you'd like to use that, you can unmute yourself. You can have yourself on camera or not. I say, let's talk. This is Lunch Bunch, and we're in it together. And today's topic again is gender bias in the workplace. And before we got started officially with our recording, I let some people know we had over 50 people RSVP for this program. And no, my name and participating wasn't even one of those RSVPs. That means this really struck a chord for some of you, or something's going on in your workplaces, or maybe you've been having conversations. Maybe you have felt you're on the receiving end. So I really want to ask you, in all sincerity, why did you decide to tune in? Why did you decide I got to participate today? Because I am pleased as punch. But what's going on? What's going on? Anyone?
We have had some complaints recently about gender bias and concerns, mostly about a small group of people who um, may not be as open as they should be to who should be at the table. And some people, I think, need more training. Some people just that's what they think, and it's hard to know how to get around those people.
Certainly. Well, and let's face it, it's my belief that this component manifests itself differently based on industries. Every industry probably has it. How it shows up or how it performs or what people say or do is going to show up differently. But that when you talk about from an organizational standpoint, from a societal standpoint, from just an individual standpoint. So where we grew up, how we grew up, who we grew up with, what were the values of the family, what we were exposed to or not is going to make a difference. And I will only speak for myself, and maybe you can give me an emoji. As I get older, some of the things that I learned that were kind of colloquialisms, little sayings, I didn't realize what the history was in some of those remarks or observations. I didn't know that they really were not okay. And so we kind of say things and it's like, oop, and you don't know if you don't know. And if no one tells you and educates you kindly, you're going to continue not to know. And I think that that's a thing where we can help each other. We also have to be willing to be kind of growth minded, not just open minded, but growth minded that it's okay and I'm willing to learn so that I don't keep stepping in it, right? So I'm seeing some notes in the chat box. Um, So it's a current issue that needs to address in all industries. I don't disagree. Um, it's an issue or concern that's always changing. How do I stay ahead of the curve, right? And part of that, I think, and you guys tell me what you're doing, is what are you reading? What are you signing up to receive in terms of information? What programs are you going to so that you can stay aware of? Because just when you think you've got maybe some of the lingo down, you understand some of the concepts. Something else comes along and you're like, when did that hit? When I don't know that. Is that something new? Was I supposed to know that? So where do you guys go to keep current or up to date?
So it's interesting, Deborah, this is Cheryl, weighing in. And so ever so long ago, when I was and so I was a non-traditional student for those who don't know me. And when I was in my undergrad program, I was fortunate to work with a lot of individuals who were like fresh out of high school kind of age groups. And it was to hear the conversations around getting a job and applying for a job and looking at why organizations chose to interview someone or maybe not, those sorts of things. And it was there at the time, it was really hard for them to get around the like years of service requirements or time in seat requirements. And in some cases, research that I did on after having those sorts of conversations also shared or let me understand that sometimes where people live when they apply for a position or their name when they apply for a position, all of those pieces, right? And things that may not necessarily occur to you outwardly, but they play a role in how somebody may perceive or see a situation. And so I know from my perspective, when I'm looking at hiring or having conversations in the workplace around performance or any of those pieces, I try so hard to make sure that we circle back to skills and performance, the non-personal, uh, you know, activities that take place in the workplace. So we're not focusing on a gender or an individual, or it isn't about their person. It's really about what they do in the workplace. But it's hard to pull people out of a, like you had said, we all have different lenses as we grow up, and based on those years of learning, we may see things differently. Where we grew up may also present opportunities for us to see things differently. And so it is interesting, but I try in my conversations to really lean back on the non-personal pieces, skills, performance, and not necessarily on the person that themselves. And that can be that can feel cold, but it definitely keeps you out of the areas that are that cause, like I think anyway, that cause issues around gender bias, age bias, uh, a lot of other biases that we may have.
Absolutely. Well, and if you think about some of what you're sharing, I would also think that we have uh, certain industries are more male dominated than female. And then if we have a female that's applying for the job, can that be if we see their name, automatic no, they can't do the job. They can't physically do the job. They don't know what they're talking about. And the answer is you haven't even talked to them yet, ask them any
Mhm.
questions, let alone a phone screen, right? Just looking at a name on a resume or in an application. So, anybody else? So I see a note in the chat box, not currently seeing this, but want to have some preparation. Promoting diversity and inclusion. Um, there is a perception of a small group, the good old boys network. Uh-huh. How do we dress effectively with this group and the organization? So one of the things that I will share with you is that as someone who typically does our lunch bunches, I often give you some stats so that you can take back and use it for whatever. That's what's coming next. Two, I have some definite questions that I have prepared for you to ask for us to discuss and for you to take back and share with others so that we won't get to all of our questions. There's no way. But I also have other questions for you to take back and discuss with your team or just inside your organizations with whomever. And I've given you some ideas and some suggestions on things that we can do inside our organizations as an HR department, as an organization as a whole, whatever that looks like, some things to pay attention to. So I think there's some things that we can do that quote effectively as an organization. Now, whether we get to talk about all of those or whether or not you can quote read them in the PowerPoint, just kind of depends on our time. But I do have some suggestions for you. So just know that that's kind of how I've laid out our time together. So, and in the material, the two reference points that I've got in here for some quotes research also links at the very end so that you can go back and look at those further if you would like to. So the Muse job board had a survey back last year. They only surveyed, so I know this is a small sampling in the grand scheme of things, but over 1,000 women, and 41% of them felt discriminated against based on their gender during the job interview. And 42% said they have encountered gender bias and inappropriate questions during the interview. So, right there, just our interviewing, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Who's involved? What kind of education and prep? And what I mean by education, what kind of training are we giving people who are doing that? Right? Do they know what they should or shouldn't? So, when we think about things happening in very explicit or covert, right? Very hidden kind of ways, these kinds of things are taking place. Now, in that same survey, 1 in 3 have hesitated to even apply for the job due to perceived gender bias. Now, again, keyword perceived. 2 out of 3 think women in their industry have a hard time getting promoted. 55% do not feel there's enough female representation in the leadership at the leadership level of the organization. 79% of the women said they're more likely to seek out organizations that have equal representation of women in managerial or leadership positions when they're looking for a job. So they're looking for that, probably going on websites, talking to people, trying to find out what that looks like in terms of numbers. Now, I think that these kinds of numbers are troubling. Now, again, just over 1,000 people, women, that's not a huge sampling. But yet 63% of them said they did not feel supported as a woman at work. So to the question about what can we do or how can we do it, one of the things I think you have to look at is what are you doing and how is that supporting women? How are we as individuals, each one of us right here in this room online, how are we, what are we doing to support each other, lifting each other up? Because as much progress in some respects as we've made, we're still we still got some things to do. We still got some accomplishments to make. So there was another survey that I found um, that Fast Company had picked up and provided some information. This was 913 women who answered open-ended questions. And from the researchers that were involved in that process, found 30 common personality traits and identified or identity-based characteristics that women used that said that were used against them in the workplace. So these are common kind of characteristics. And guess what? I have them for you. The women included in that survey, there were 4 female dominated industries. So they actually went to female dominated industries. And these were the characteristics that they brought up. So higher education, healthcare, the legal profession, and not for profits. So I'm wondering whether or not you might even be thinking about characteristics that might pop up for you and whether or not you think any of these might be influencing in your workplace or have impacted you, and whether or not, because there are lots of biases out there, but here's the characteristics that they listed. Take a look at those and let me know whether or not you think maybe you've experienced, you've heard people talk about, sadly, you've been in the room when. And of course, those of you who are listening on demand and not actually seeing the slide, there were things like accent and attractiveness and body size, nationality, marital status, personality traits, let alone seniority, sexual orientation, employment history pops up, is coming through the chat box. So one of the things that people kind of talk about as a phrase around some of this is, quote, the female is never quite right. And what we really want is we want what you aren't, is what people say. It's like we had the interview and we're looking for something that you just aren't, but we can't put our finger on it. Like, well, what the heck does that mean? So when all we're reading about is skills hiring, what skills do people have? And the answer is, these don't have anything to do with my skills. Now, seniority means I've been around for a while and maybe I've accumulated skills, but this isn't skill based. So why are we making decisions or thinking about that? So I'm not telling you anything you guys don't know. Note in the chat box, I'm in the construction arena, and notice leaders from general contractors in meetings and emails start their emails with gentlemen. Yes, even though there are women on the team, right? Yes. And some things are habits die hard, and others are, is anybody saying anything to them? Is anybody bringing that up? Is anybody pulling them to the side? Is anybody providing a gentle reminder? We have women on the team too. We need to stop using that term. Could we please start using something else? Hey, team. Hey, all. Something, right? So, why do we need to address these things? I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I will share with you that prime age of worker bees is about 24, 25 to 54. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm actually not in that age group anymore, apparently. I've passed my prime. I didn't know that until so I don't know if anybody's with me on I'm outside the prime. But our workforce, so prime age in terms of women in the workforce is near 78%. This is a record high. When it comes to how many millions of people, there's only about 10 million difference between men and women in the workplace. I think that's right. Maybe it was 100 million. It might be off in a zero. But when we talk about the bias impacting our hiring, our retention activities, let alone equity kinds of things, we have to turn from an organizational standpoint awareness into action. We can't just quote be aware that this is a thing. We actually have to do something about this. So it has to be intentional. And so discussion questions. Now, these are the 5 that I thought that we could talk about. I actually came up with about 12 or 11 or 12 of these. So where is it showing up most often in your workplace or your work activities or whatever we want to call it, whether it's workplace, remote, hybrid, um, whatever that looks like, or your activities? Where are you seeing it or examples that you can share? And you don't have to tell us where you work. So I want to be thoughtful about that.
Deborah, I was going to just chime in and say a lot of what we tend to see is from external sources like members or clients.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've had some where they've made some very derogatory comments and often find that maybe we don't take a stance. And I think for the sake of being neutral, But we had a client that actually told somebody they should purchase rice more often so that they can feed their kids and stay home where they belong. Yeah, things like that. So it's like to me that, like, as an organization, I feel like we should be able to take a really strong stand, but often maybe don't as much as we could and or should.
Right there with you. And that's the kind of thing that, depending on who heard it, right? And then being able to report it to a leadership type person to have a conversation with said individual or individuals, so that it's coming from the highest level. Or who does that client work directly with in some fashion? Who has the closest working relationship? Someone that they would, quote, listen to, that they would hear the message from them about. Would we, as an organization, and this would might be a conversation to take back to, quote, the team, and ask, would we ever say we will discontinue doing business with you, whether that is as a customer utilizing our services, our products, or we will stop purchasing from you if we heard something like that, if it were to, quote, continue?
Mm-hmm.
That's how serious we take this in terms of respectful treatment. We don't even have to go to, quote, discriminatory remarks, gender anything.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about treating a human being like a human being.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know anybody's personal circumstances. Have we? Would we? I think that's important to ask. Maybe a maybe an emoji. Has anyone done it?
I think that's a really hard thing to do, depending again on the environment that you're in, or the organization, or I think you had pointed out, what kind of a workplace you're in. If you're in a male dominated workplace, and then you need to make that stand. I mean, some of the things that if you go back a couple screens, and I'm not asking you to, I'm just saying if you did, and you had that one stat there where there were incorrect questions during an interview, and I'm like, how did that get past HR? I, I mean, I'm just, I would be flabbergasted. But again, it seems to fall on HR a lot. You'd be the one that you'd have to make that comment in your workplace. Hey, we're not doing business with those guys. And so if you're in a male dominated workplace, sometimes those conversations are really hard, and it takes a lot to stand up or stand forward or step forward and have those conversations. And so I agree with your question. Would you do that? I mean, you have to be very secure. And if you're a female in a male dominated organization, do you have a voice big enough to be listened to, right?
Right.
And then you come back to the seat at the table thing.
Mm-hmm. It also goes to just the question of culture in general. I mean, in that respects, have we created, has the organization created, um, a psychologically safe organization that I can ask questions, that I can nudge on something? What's the core values of the organization? If my question is helping to support the core values of the organization, and that kind of statement goes against any element of our mission, vision, core values, I think we have the right to ask. We aren't living, we're not walking, we're not talking our core values.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that we're actually trying to do is craft a code of conduct for vendors and clients. And that they can be uninvited essentially, and it kind of just goes through, but we're working to get support at the very executive level. So
Right. And again, top down on things like this,
yeah.
right? Exactly.
Yeah, not just the physical part, but the, just the being disrespectful and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
hate speech, things like that.
Exactly. And if we allow it to happen and we don't say anything,
Hmm.
then that's permission to keep
Right.
doing it.
And likely will continue.
Mm-hmm. And even to a question number 2 on the screen, witness or experience kind of even the subtle gender bias kinds of things in the chat box. Erin says, hey, been to meetings where the women are the note takers, or assuming that they'll do all the event planning or that they'll be on the committee, right? Deborah, I see you have your hand up. I think that's your hand up, right? What say you, my fellow namesake?
Hello.
Hello.
What I find too, I'm in construction. Um, we have a fair amount of women, both on site and in our office. But what I find is that women are, mm, I feel like because they're already in a male-dominated industry, they almost seem like I'm not going to ask for anything. I'm not going to ask for a raise. I'm not going to ask. So when I do reviews, uh, I prompt them and say why. I have had every male in my office ask for a raise, and I have not had one female ask for a raise. Yes. And so I asked them in the review, I'm like, why aren't you asking? Because you're doing great work. You deserve it. And I think some of that is just what we've learned culturally to be the people pleaser, help out, do everything. So I- yeah, I find that I have to stick up for them because I see them doing the work, but they're just not using their voice. So,
Hmm. And I think what might go along with that a little bit is, have they been taught to? Who's
right,
taught them to be more assertive? And
right.
how do I have that conversation? How do I ask? How do I phrase? How
Hmm.
do I toot my own horn?
Right.
And that's not bragging, that's acceptable, that it's permissible.
Hmm.
And, I think your comment about, we take care of everybody. I think sometimes we're still, as a gender, we're very much still caretakers. Many that is still part of how we're seen by many, and that we're still trying to navigate being in the workplace and what does that look like and mean, even though it's been decades and decades and decades of a
Exactly.
reality. There's still kind of a societal component that, sure, go ahead and work, but you still got to have dinner on the table.
Exactly.
And I'm like, if my family wants dinner on the table from me, you're gonna be hungry because it's not happening, right? So, but then every family is different. People expectations, what does that look like? But I don't know that people are even necessarily always talking, and I'm digressing a little. I don't know that everybody's always talking about that inside their homes, let alone talking about it inside the workplace, or what it is that I really want from work or my life or whatever. So then I'm supposed to also ask for a raise? How do I do that? Who's teaching women how to do that? It's not the men. Now,
Oh, that's a good question.
I'm not going to say men haven't taught women how to do that, because I actually know, I think 2 that I can name off the top of my head who have said, "Hey, this is okay and you can do this. I'm happy to help you." But again, women who have been very successful, they are the ones that can. I'm not going to say should, but I also think we can ask someone else for assistance and support in that regards. But then that feels sometimes, I think, for people awkward and uncomfortable. I don't know that I should ask. Why can't you? So
Right.
there's got to be these, I don't know, barriers or um, veils hanging down that we're like, I don't know if I'm supposed to look through that or pull that aside or is that okay? And we've got to be better at it's all okay. Context matters, approach matters, tone and words matter. But the answer is otherwise, then don't we become like resentful? Are we going to
Mm-hmm.
stay? That's not a retention component, not a good one anyway.
No, exactly. And that's why I advocate for them, but I'm also trying to explain to them, like, I see your value and you need to see your value, you know,
Bingo.
and that is
Bingo.
all.
Yeah.
Scene.
No, no, yeah, and scene. Yeah. And why don't more of us see that or understand that? Or I think also that we might not necessarily hear it as much as is needed from others. And that's peers, other women, men, bosses, whatever that looks like, might not be heard, pointed out, maybe not specific enough. So, okay, question number 3. Maybe some of you guys will chime in on this one too. What's the difference between unconscious bias and intentional discrimination? And why does it matter? Does it matter? Is the distinction that great? What what say you?
It does matter because, and I think an example of unconscious bias is when a male calls the women in the office girls,
Mm,
but not meaning harm or anything intentional. But then I say, you want to be called boys? That doesn't seem right. And then then the eyes open and I'm sorry.
mhm, mhm,
Intentional discrimination. I've seen that too, where people try to exclude. We don't need to put her on the email. She doesn't need to be in the meeting.
mhm.
So
Well, and Cheryl, I see your hand, so please feel free. I think one of the things that I sometimes struggle with your example, Deborah, is that we don't want men to necessarily call us girls, but then don't we say, "Hey, girls, are we all going to lunch or not?" We say it to ourselves, but it's okay if we do it, but it's not okay if other people do it. So then it's a mixed message to our counterparts, and they don't know what to do with that. And so I think that can be a struggle, especially then if we're definitely in a male dominated environment, right? Because then there's just a few, quote unquote, of us. And then for those of us that work in a all female environment, we don't even think twice about things like that. And that could have our own set of challenges. So, yes, and okay, Miss Cheryl, what about you?
So you had talked a little bit earlier about unconscious bias and, again, coming from the lenses that we grew up in. And so some of those things just sort of trip out and you don't realize it until somebody else is kind enough to bring it to your attention and you have the opportunity to learn. And I guess why does the distinction matter? From my perspective, unconscious bias is not an intentional comment. It's one that kind education is greatly appreciated. We all have opportunity to learn every day, because there are things that may slide out of your comment, a conversation, a word, a statement that it has an undertone that you had no idea, just because you didn't have a clue, right? And so it's nice when somebody is kind enough to help you in that learning piece. Intentional discrimination, in today's world, I say that with all the care in my heart, but it's just cruel. If somebody is there, it's just cruel. Or you should know better today. When someone makes an intentional discriminatory comment, to me, that's a right now my eyebrows will go up, and I would say, what was that? What did I just, I mean, almost as a shocker that I just heard a statement like that. Although it's not, in some cases, I guess, maybe a total shocker, but still it would be something that you would address right away. And I don't see those as gentle, kind, educational opportunities. Rather, that's a course correction. We need to reroute the ship. And so I see a definite difference between those things. I don't mind a gentle educational opportunity, but boy howdy, when something else comes up, it's like, what are we doing here? And to me, those are the ones that are the worst, because it is intended. And so then what's the goal? Where are you going? And why would you do that? And that's just cruel.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a piece here is how comfortable does someone who's been on the receiving end, how comfortable do they feel to say something, right? What's been the true impact to them? Because sometimes we can say something and we're unaware of the impact that we've had on someone else. The intentional element is you intended some kind of harm. You wanted that to resonate with them. And to what end? And to what end with anybody else who might also have been present or heard it? What are you trying to establish there in some fashion? So are we also educating people on how to draw boundary lines or how to speak up on their own behalf? Because I'm a fan of a one and done kind of, I can let you know that was too much and not to do it again. Because then if you do it again, we definitely know it was intentional. And and then, then I can get my supervisor involved or I can get HR involved. But I'm also a fan of the lowest level of resolution that we can muster up. Um, because I also think that we have some folks that just automatically turn everything over to someone else. Here's my monkey, please take it over. And the answer is okay, that also is not going to be helpful because then everything gets elevated. So I don't know that everybody always knows what should be elevated and what shouldn't be elevated. And how do we then, to Kim's point, how do we say something to somebody when this is not even an employee of ours? This is an outsider, supplier, vendor, distributor, customer, client. And now, how do we gently say, that doesn't really work for us? We, we'd like to encourage what we teach here or what we reinforce our policies support. And we'd like to do business with people who also are, right? I think depending on that can be a conversation at the beginning when we start doing business with each other. And then it's a gentle reminder that maybe that statement doesn't support those agreements we put in place at the beginning. But that might be a whole different story for another time. So, what about job descriptions or performance reviews? Is there anything in what you have or what you're doing, whether it's the forms or the process or information that are they playing a role in reinforcing some gender stereotyping? Like the language that maybe is used in how they're written? Because that can be kind of an auditing kind of process is going through and reading how they're written, and taking a closer look at that. Sometimes even our job announcements, the way they're written, um, when we talk about how like assertive aggressive or something the job is, then there's more male dominated language versus female dominated language, and both sides could opt out based on what they're reading, like, yeah, that job's not going to be for me. And so being able to kind of be a little bit more gender neutral with our language might be a consideration and something to pay attention to. Okay. All right. So based on the fact of I'm looking at the clock, I'm going to be honest. Um, I'm glad you guys are chiming in, and I appreciate you verbally and in the chat box. I did have a second page of questions. Again, you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint so you can take these back and share with the group. So when we think about what can we do or what kind of comes next, pay attention to like how ideas are shared inside meetings or in the hallway, right? Or via email. I'm guessing back to that earlier question about the kind of little bit more subtle scenarios. Anybody share an idea inside a meeting? And this doesn't have to necessarily be at work, maybe in your volunteer capacities. You share an idea, nobody's really listening or paying attention, then someone else shares an idea and they're like, that's a fabulous thing. And you're like, I just said that. Did anybody hear me? The person sitting next to you, did you hear me? I just said that. Right? It's like, what transpired there? Right? So sometimes people are disengaging and ideas aren't being heard. We're tuning people out. Well, is that a gender thing? Is that a something else? Is that past experiences? But that also could be some kind of unwritten rule that's going on inside our workplace. And being able to be thoughtful about this can happen to women often where they've pitched an idea and nobody was really listening, but then a male counterpart does it and all of a sudden, hello? Or how about a, a woman is pitching an idea in a meeting, she's getting the full interrogation, her male counterparts have pitched ideas and they're just sailing through. But there might also have been the meeting before the meeting, and the woman didn't know about that meeting and wasn't invited to that meeting. So the vetting had already been done with the male counterparts' ideas. So are there things going on that we don't know about? Back to maybe that old boys network kind of scenario. So we need to pay attention and we need to be thoughtful about how that's going on inside our organizations. Also, when we talk about I, I call it lazy language, right? When we talk about people making a comment, an off the cuff remark, a kind of maybe an under their breath kind of something. She's when we're talking about hiring somebody, she's not really a great fit, or promotion. I don't know that she's really going to fit in that department. She's too emotional. He's a great guy. Hello? What are we talking about here? So when we say those things, we actually need to stop them in the moment. Yes, it will be uncomfortable, but that's the kind of thing. Can you give me a specific example of what you're talking about? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean when you say that? Because usually, not always, usually when we nudge a little, when we apply a little pressure for that specific example, they can't give us one. And if you can't give us one, then there's no merit to that statement. And that's what we're looking for is give me a fact. Give me something to hang my hat on with that. And earlier I said, words are important. Now, I realize I'm going to say this and I realize what my name is, but sometimes people go, oh, she's such a Debbie Downer. And it's like, come on now. This is not something it, there's also like negative Nelly. It also could be Neil negative, negative Neil. We don't just have to be a Nelly, right? So we have to have, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander too there. Um, so if you, the whole thing here is we also could kind of like later in the slides, there's a comment about flip the script. Words are important. Would we say this about a man? Would we say this about a man? And if the answer is no, then we shouldn't say it about a woman. And I think that's what we have to like call people on. We've got to stop them. We've got to interrupt them. Maybe even interrupt ourselves. And when I said, who's helping, who's standing up for, we already heard that Deborah said she's an advocate for people when it comes to pay increases and such. And that's one individual. And I'm not suggesting that the rest of you aren't. It's not enough in terms of that. So when we have the opportunity, how can we be an active ally, right? This might be more than, quote, being a mentor. This is like sponsoring somebody, helping them through, taking the initiative when they're young and helping them not only in high school, but through college, through the first job or more. So this is what are we doing with groups of underrepresented groups of women in some fashion or another in our industry, in our profession? Are you seeking those groups out? Is there something as part of your association that could focus on this within your industry of some sort or another? So, and here's what I said when I said, flip it to test it of sorts. How many of you heard you need to smile more? Has anybody ever heard that before? Okay, well, men are going to have kids and not men are going to have kids and not want to work as part of that hiring process. She's probably going to want to have kids, so we're probably not going to want to hire her. She's going to be gone in a couple of years. You don't hear us saying about that about a man, do you? No, maybe we're saying it a little bit more because we've got PLO and we've got more men taking more of an active role than we've ever had before. Or, Larry's got prostate cancer. He's not going to be able to fulfill his job duties. Do we hear that? I'm not trying to be rude, but I don't think we do. So again, flip it and ask ourselves, would we ever say these things about a man? And if we wouldn't, then we shouldn't be saying these things in terms of a woman. And I believe that these are some of the kind of the concrete steps that we can start to take in terms of what are we doing? How are we doing it? What do we need to be kind of doing differently inside our organizations? So when we talk about giving feedback, aiding them in how to have better conversations, when we think about performance reviews, formal performance evaluations, what is that looking like in terms of making sure that the feedback is subjective rather and that it's constructive and objective, not subjective, right? Giving clear ideas on how to excel, where to excel, focusing on the qualities that we're looking for, not the soft, squishy stuff, but specific things that make you promotable, that will aid you in developing in the job, that will grow you in the profession. And yes, there is a certain element of not taking it personally. Um, we as women, to our earlier conversation, right? Research has demonstrated that, any kind of characteristic can be proclaimed kind of a problematic area. And we then tend to internalize that and go, oh, competency, not able to. And it's like, no, 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 no. That somehow we need to fix something about that. We got to be thoughtful about pay attention to constructive feedback, analyze whether there's some legitimacy to that, But the idea is that some of these criticisms, there's nothing here that is substantial and substantiated. So anything that's your identity, the answer is no, you don't have to listen to that garbage. And when we think about systematic bias, right, the institutional structural bias inside our organization, we probably should take a closer look at what is the rules or the policies, the habits, our culture, what have we allowed to continue to perpetuate in some fashion or another? And do we need to take a hard look at things? Do we need to alter some policies? Do we need to call ourselves out? Or, as the young people say, call ourselves in? Instead of calling people out, we call them in because we want to be inclusive to the process. And when we think about, moving beyond symbolic actions and really taking true actions, right? And more inclusive kinds of activities, I gave you kind of some look. We can have some wonderful things posted on a wall or a little brochure or something. The answer is, are we truly doing equity? So whether that's around pay equity, and yes, we have that here in the state of Oregon, right? Okay, do we have a diversity, equity, inclusion committee, but it has no authority, it has no meat. And yes, it's been under fire recently. But is it tied to our leadership's performance? Is it actually actionable? Are we measuring things? Okay, so we have annual training, but does it have outcomes? Not if everybody's still using language and we're not saying anything to anybody. All we did was check a box that we performed the annual training. We got to be proactive in what we're up to. So, some other things that I gave you that are bullet points here: clear policies, process in our interviewing, leadership pipelines for people in development, and language that goes with that, pay transparency and our communication around that, and auditing what we're doing. When we think about caregiving and people being caregivers to either littles or olders in our family, um, when we think about the data that we have, how are you using that? So, and responding accordingly to whether it's flexible schedules that are needed or creating mentorship opportunities. And then some discussion starters for inside your organization about what we're doing or how we're doing it, or are we measuring things? Are we measuring the right things? If we're measuring things, are we actually using it and then coming back and revisiting and following up and following through? Because I think you can have some, a roadmap of sorts where, are we truly looking at things? Are we asking for feedback from employees? What are they experiencing? How are they experiencing it? What recommendations would they have for us? Thinking about things from their perspective, not from our perspective or just from an organizational perspective. And that's everybody inside, our field workers, out in the field or out our crews, whatever that looks like. And then when we're making progress or when there's things to celebrate, that we recognize the energy and the effort that we're putting into things. It matters because otherwise it's a small group that might be recognizing, but everybody doesn't know that we're actually making strides or that we're getting better marks or improvement or compliments from inside and outside the organization for our energy and efforts. That can matter. So, my question to you then is, based on what you heard today, is there something that resonated with you? And is there something you need to start doing, start thinking about? And I say thinking, I really want you to move to action. Something, one thing, one step as an organization, maybe even more importantly, you as an individual. What's one thing that you can start doing, or maybe even stop doing? And is there someone that you can share some of these questions or observations with inside the organization, or even a friend, to get the discussion going, get more of it started so that we as women, because you'll notice if you look, I don't, unless I missed something, I don't think we have any gentlemen on the call today. And that's too bad. And maybe, gentlemen, you're listening after the fact, and I hope that you are. And if you have any questions or need any follow-up information, then we're here to assist in that regards too. So, questions, now's a good time to ask. We are about at that time, but I will always hang out with folks. These are those two resources, the links that I referenced to the research, so that you can go back and look at those if you would like. And then we do have programming planned pretty much the rest of the year. I did have a topic planned for October. I still can do it, but I actually have two leads on two other topics that I might want to explore with guests. So I'm going to bump one of mine and maybe invite someone else to come in and join our conversation. So, and I'm always open to you guys sharing ideas on what would be meaningful for you as a discussion and conversation that we can have. What are you experiencing or wanting to hear from others to weigh in on? So please let me know. Please let me know, and let's build out our programming for 2026. Okay, so I want to first say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking up. If this was your first time, I hope you'll come back. Those of you who have been with me before, as always, good to see you. So, questions, other things you want to share? The mic, as they say, is yours. What say you? What say you?
I'll just say, like, I was listening and we've gone through a lot of the things that were suggested about looking at our language for job announcements, looking at our personnel rules to make sure, and we're in the process of updating those as we speak. So by next year, we should be getting a grip on that. A lot of our personnel rules said him, her, she, he. So we're doing they there. So just making sure that, and I work for state government, so we're always trying to, keep it real. And that was really nice to hear that, a lot of the things you're saying, I feel like we've thought about and we're doing. So appreciate that.
Good. Well, I'm a big fan of whenever you go to a program, there's an opportunity for confirmation of my
Right?
knowledge and action and activities, right? And then is
Yes.
there something new that I can learn? There's one thing
Yeah.
that I can walk away with. So,
Yeah.
Lisa, I see your hand too.
Thank you. So we were approached, HR, I should say, was approached about potentially, maybe forming a group or some kind of leadership training specifically to women. But then that also begs the question, especially with current administration and EEOC guidance, employee resource groups, you need to make sure they're not discriminatory. And how do we go about that to build that but not be discriminatory?
Right. Well, one of the things you might consider two observations, and I would encourage anybody else to please weigh in on this, is um, you certainly can call them something else if you would like. I actually had a client tell me that they were kind of changing the wording from they were focusing just on inclusion, right? Belonging. They were focusing using the word empower. They were empowering their employees in terms of doing that. So being able to think about we're still going to have some of our initiatives, some of our activities. We're just going to change a little bit of our vocabulary that because then it doesn't have that glaring um, label, as it were, that then that way it doesn't change who we are or what we do. It doesn't change our view or our values of people and what we believe in. We've just changed the wording so that it doesn't have this spotlight that could cause us angst. And then there have been other folks that have, I'm going to try and choose my words carefully, succumb to maybe pressure and said, we're going to continue to do what we've always done, and we will continue to call things what we've always done. And because we believe that that's an okay thing. So I think you get to choose. You might just ask the employees, what what would you like to do or how would you like to do it? Because this is about you and us, right? This is about how we connect and share and educate. And I still remember, and I was in my 20s. So this was like 40 years ago. I still remember SAFE and having an opportunity to go on site. And I know technology has changed, but I still remember them having an area in their building in the Salem office that was a library that employees could go to. One, they could contribute to it, but the organization built a library that was just this huge resource library about all kinds of things that allowed an employee to learn on their own. And it was one of those where that was part of one of their ERG initiatives was providing information so that employees wanted to learn about could be conflict resolution, it could be communication, it could be about different there was even topics that would have been more around sexuality because people had questions. It was about health and wellness initiatives. It was about the whole gambit of just life, even financial assistance and resources that were available. It was just a resource library for employees, and they got to make recommendations about what could be in the library to assist each other in living life. And that was a wonderful, I thought at the time, a wonderful resource that they all contributed to and aided in the organization, knowing what the employees needed. So I think sometimes asking employees, what would be helpful to you? What would be beneficial to you? In, instead of us thinking that we know it all, going directly to them. And I would ask the question to all of you, have you altered? Are you doing something different? Have you heard or read some things? And I don't know if Lisa, you're a member of Society for Human Resource Management, but they just announced on their website that they've altered. A year ago, they altered from diversity, equity, inclusion to inclusion being kind of the lead. But they also just made some changes to their website and their whole inclusion kind of activities. So if you haven't seen that, you might take a peek at that as well, because that might answer or provide you with some um, observations as well.
Are you talking
So
about the beam structure?
I believe so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just thought I didn't have a chance to read everything. I was just kind of going through some stuff and I was like, "Ooh, kind of like earmark for later."
Yeah. When you
So,
have time.
kind of. So, anybody else to Lisa's question or point? Not hearing anything and not seeing anything in the chat. So the other thing you might do, and I've not done this, is see whether or not you could do Google, but you also might use AI and just see what alternative phrases or words than ERG, employee resource groups, it might come up with and see whether or not it has some suggestions. They. I call my AI MVP, my most valuable partner. And that is not a joke. I actually say, "Hi MVP, I have a new request." Other questions or observations or resources to share in this space? Okay, well, we all can still keep talking, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to officially end this recording for the July HR Lunch Bunch. Again, my name is Deborah Jeffries. Thank you for being here. And if you would like to join us on August 6th, we're going to be talking about employee transitions. It's a hot topic. Anyway, we hope that we will see you in the future. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a good rest of your week. Have a good 4th of July and take care of yourself. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Appreciate it.